Thank you and good afternoon. So my name is Matthew Bullymore. I'm a IT security manager for a company called GFK, and the title of my talk is a pragmatic approach to implementing host-based firewalls on workstations. So one of my most useful quotes is from a guy called John Strand, who's a SANS lecturer, and he said that you should treat the internal network as hostile, because it is. And most of us work in large organizations which have tens of thousands of endpoints across there, and we don't really have that much visibility into the internal network. We've generally got a lot of security controls around the perimeter. So a lot of the security framework, like the Australian Signals Directorate or SANS Critical Controls, recommend the implement host-based firewalls. But when I was looking around, I couldn't see much guidance on this. So this talk is some of the things that I've learned when I've implemented host-based firewalls to protect machines when they're on the corporate network and off the corporate network. And I've done this in 5 organizations now, from 150 people to 3,500 people globally. So why do this? As Miko mentioned in the keynote speech earlier, there's been a lot of destructive malware, specifically last year with NotPetya and WannaCry, hitting organizations like DLA Piper, the NHS or Maersk, causing significant amount of damage. You've also got malicious actors propagating through the network. So one of the really useful resources is the MITRE ATT&ck framework, and that details out 14 methods that APT actors use for lateral movement. So if you implement host-based firewalls on your workstations, you can disrupt them in 9 of those different areas pretty cheaply and easily. So when I've done this, it's had minimal impact to the business, and the cost has been very low as well, because host-based firewalls are typically part of your endpoint security suite, like McAfee or Symantec. So you may already be using it or licensed for it, just not getting the most value out of it. And also, when you have a pen test or a red team exercise or something like that, it's always good to make it as challenging for them as possible and to detect the kind of activity that they're doing. So when they have a point of presence on the network and they're using tools like Bloodhound to enumerate your assets, your Active Directory, having host-based firewalls means that Bloodhound looks very, very blank, that they can't connect to any of the machines and see who's logged into which machine and who has administrative privileges on it. It also stops them from easily pivoting across the network with pass-the-hash attacks or pass-the-token and things like that. So this is a typical attack that I'm talking about. So we have a compromised machine in the middle. It doesn't really matter how it was compromised. Could be phishing, could be drive-by download. But once the attacker's got a point of presence on the network, they can then connect to any other machine, typically via SMB, TCP 445, and just propagate through the network. But if you implement host-based firewalls, you can stop that from happening, and you also have a really good detective control. So if you send the events from the host-based firewalls to a SIM, then you can actually detect when this is happening, which is very useful, and most organizations don't have this visibility. Okay, so how did I build my policy? So the first thing I looked at was how many applications we had across the estate, and it was thousands. So we pretty much gave up on filtering outbound connections from the machines very quickly. So then I focused on inbound traffic to the machines so that all the machines defend themselves. So the first thing was to do a port scan using Nmap, Nessus, Qualys, Rapid7, whatever you want, identifying all the services that are listening on the network, who connects to them, and that was the bulk of the work. Then I did some documentation review from vendors. So the first piece is very good, but it won't tell you if the vendor's actually using port ranges that you need to allow inbound to the machine. And then I had some workshops with the stakeholders to try and identify any edge cases that I'd missed, or machines that I hadn't scanned using Nessus or something like that. You're not looking for perfection, you're just looking to raise the bar. Yeah. So this is a typical egress policy that most organisations would have when the machine is off the corporate network, so if it's in Starbucks or something like that. And it's very simple, it's deny all inbound traffic. But then when we look at what we do, the kind of firewall policy that we need so that the machine functions correctly as part of Active Directory, we have to allow a lot more inbound ports. But we can specify where they come from. So I created effectively 3 different buckets. So servers is one category that I created, and that's Active Directory controllers, file and print servers, that kind of thing. Your support ranges would be your service desk, so jump servers or systems that they connect through to provide remote support, and also IT security. So the first section is the ports that are required for Active Directory for the machine to be part of the domain. Then we've got the remote control sections. This could be something like Dameware, Landesk, SCCM, or IDP. So you only want those to be allowed inbound from specific support ranges. Skype for Business was interesting. So the voice and screen sharing functionality of Skype is a host-to-server communication, but the file transfer function is actually host-to-host communication. So you do need to allow that inbound from all of your machines. When I was testing with VoIP applications, all of that seemed to be host-to-server communication as well. So we didn't need to write any specific rules for that. And then you've got IT security for incident response or network vulnerability scanning activities. Okay, so it took me about a day to build the original policy, to scan the machines and work out what was going on. Then it was a couple of hours for workshops with the engineering teams that actually managed the Windows workstation assets and built them. A day or so to implement the policy. A day to test the machines on a couple of virtual machines to make sure it didn't break anything fundamental. And then a week to test with a pilot group. So you typically want power users, something like that, people that are going to find and spot problems for you. And then you can do an incremental rollout, typically following your standard patching processes. So it might be by floor, by office, by business area. Okay, so what issues did I encounter? So my experience, the engineering teams that actually manage and build the Windows systems don't have a very good understanding of how they operate on the network. So you're going to have to guide them through that quite a lot. You also have some business areas or some people that do some pretty crazy stuff, like you provide them with a file server, but they decide they don't want to use it, and they start sharing files directly from their C drive. So yeah, I've encountered challenges like that, and really it's stakeholder management, just getting buy-in from the top and squishing their concerns flat. And the final thing was fairly humorous for me. The engineering team that actually implemented the firewall policy decided that they would only allow outbound TCP from this machine. They wouldn't bother allowing outbound UDP, which broke AD and all Kerberos authentication for the pilot group. But that was my fault because I didn't check what they'd done. So once you've implemented it, how do you actually know it's effective? Just fire up your favorite port scanner, like Nmap, and just make sure that the ports you've closed down are actually closed down. So what's next? So once you've done that on your Windows workstations, most organisations have Macs. Execs like Macs, they're shiny. So you can do a similar approach to that. You can also take it and apply it to servers. But I've always struggled with this. When you're faced with several thousand servers, no one really knows what they're doing, who owns them, what they communicate with. So my approach would be to start off with something like RDP. So you should know where your jump servers are or where your IT administrators sit. And you can get confidence in the tools around that, and it doesn't break production traffic. And then you can move on to things like SSH, Microsoft ports, or SQL as well, because you don't want your normal line of business users being able to connect to SQL directly. You could also look at using the Windows Advanced Firewall. This has some pretty interesting functionality, which I haven't tested, but it allows you to do IPsec-based authentication on ports. So you need to be members of specific security groups to even see that ports are open. Although, from my understanding and speaking with some colleagues, it's quite hard to troubleshoot that. Okay, so these are some useful links if you do try and do this in your organisations. Any questions?